I love historical fiction because there's a literal truth and there's an emotional truth. And what the fiction writer tries to create is that emotional truth. Jewel Parker Rhodes.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hole.
And I'm Lee Esses. Today we are talking about a genre that has mostly fallen by the wayside the last few decades, which means it's about due in the genre cycle to come back pretty soon. And I'm starting to see some of that in the writing world. Mostly we're talking about Westerns today.
We will be talking a little bit here and there about historical fiction. However, the target audience for specifically Westerns and historical fiction tend to be separate. And with historical fiction, it's really hard to talk about that because so much of the marketing, so much of the information really depends on what era of history you're talking about.
There is quite a bit of overlap, but our focus will be on Westerns. And we're going to start off by talking about who that target audience is. The overlap in this is it's generally Gen X. Most of the people I know that read either category will be Gen X in some capacity.
See, I would have put boomers for this one. Westerns especially, I actually associate with the generation before the boomers. Just because, like, my grandparents would always watch Westerns all the time, and they would be the ones to read the Westerns. But I do see, overall, this being an older generation sort of interest.
See, the people that come to mind that read Westerns specifically, there are two kinds. The older men who like the violence associated with justice, and horse girls of pretty much any generation, but especially the people that come to mind right now. They like the romantic Westerns, and that's actually younger, even millennial.
On the other side, and part of why we're not talking a whole lot about historical fiction is because the historical fiction tends to be the middle-aged through retirement women who are reading those kinds of books. So you have very different target audiences between Western and historical. When you are talking about trying to market your Western, the cover is going to play a key role. The imagery especially is going to be what conveys the contents of the story. The fact that it is a Western, you're going to have a lot of sepia tones. You're going to have a horse and a hat and a beautiful view.
When it comes to font, I feel like we already know exactly what this font is. In Google Docs, it's the Rockwell font is a good place to start. But if you just Google Western fonts, you're going to find exactly what you're looking for.
If you want something more rugged Western, it's going to be a serif font, but it's going to be a little edgier. It's going to have some like torn looks to it, but it's going to be bold. It's going to be thick. It's going to be blunt.
And the art style for the cover will be an almost realistic drawing. Sometimes you'll have actual pictures, but they're heavily filtered. But you'll have the back of a lady with her dress blowing in the wind as she's looking out across the fields of grain, or something like that.
What I picture a lot for a Western specifically is like a couple of cowboys doing a cattle run.
As far as the content of your book, I think a lot of the places that people go wrong is they don't lean into that morality of the Western. They just kind of go, it's set in this time period, but it's basically characters nowadays.
Yeah, so many Westerns are dealing with that debate of who are we without the bounds of society. People in the Old West were living on the edges. There was no major government control. There was sheriffs, but there were a lot of gangs as well. So it's just this constant fight for power and a question of what are people willing to do to protect what's theirs, to find justice in this unjust world.
When you are looking at marketing your book, consider centering the Western around a specific event. A lot of the more popular ones that have sold lately, the Killers of the Flower Moon, those kinds of things, there is a historical setting that happens around your character. So you can kind of do Civil War, that's not super Western, it's just regionally a different location. But the Trail of Tears, the Modoc Wars, the Orphan Trains, these kinds of things where there are events happening that your readers are familiar with, and then they get to emotionally connect with the historical facts they already know.
And this applies to a lot of historical fiction in general. You'll have a story based around World War II. You'll have a story based around the Tudor Wars. You'll have a story based around specific well-known events in history, and you may or may not use real people from those events, but it provides a structure, a framework for your readers to understand when your book is taking place.
The last thing to consider about the content is to connect with the actual sci-fi, especially the hyper-realistic hard sci-fi, because a lot of these ideas about living on the edge of the universe and being left to fend for ourselves, the terraforming, the coming to a new place and exploring these gorgeous vistas, all of these things overlap really well. So if you can connect with people who write that kind of sci-fi, if you are struggling to find other Western authors, sometimes those audiences will overlap.
Good examples for that are Firefly within the television realm, and then a book I'm reading currently that I absolutely love is The Cascade Failure. Has the same kind of very Western sort of vibes, but within a sci-fi setting.
When it comes to releasing Westerns, because that market isn't super saturated yet, there isn't an optimum time of year. It's more about making and keeping momentum with the releasing schedule, because people who read one will want to immediately read the next one you write and the one after that. So the faster you can get these out and the more predictably, so if you release them every March or whatever, these tend to be the most helpful. If you have a local week where Westerns suddenly become big because it's, gold rush days or whatever, we're in California, then releasing around that time period can be helpful because everyone's already in the mood for a Western. But having that predictable rhythm of release can be very helpful in maximizing the timing with your audience.
As for where to go to sell your books, your in-person presence is going to be stronger. Part of this is due to the general older age group that's interested in Westerns, but it's also because you can find niche interests that align with the ideas and thoughts and stuff happening in a Western, such as a writing club or a gun club.
A lot of the people I know that have read a Western for the first time read it because it was part of their book club. So that is how they're exposed to this particular genre when they wouldn't necessarily already be involved because they really liked Yellowstone or whatever. So if you can get your book listed at the library's book club for the second month after release or whatever, then that will be helpful in exposing new people to this genre that would really enjoy your book but might not necessarily look for a Western right off the bat.
And you may have a rodeo or a roundup or something that takes place in your area. They may have some vendor street events. Those might be a good option for you, depending on what those kinds of events are.
You can also check out local radio stations and local magazines. A lot of your target audience are more radio people than television, especially like Netflix people. And they're more magazine and sometimes newspaper, although newspaper advertising is difficult. As for your options digitally with social media, you're going to find a fairly good basis on Goodreads in those categories. If you can reach bestseller lists on Amazon in the Western subgenre sort of categories, those are going to be a good place. And then Facebook is going to be another good option for you when it comes to finding people in the age group that generally reads Westerns. When it comes to why people are reading Westerns, I feel like there's quite a bit of nostalgia, not only with the Clint Eastwood spaghetti Western, that older Gen X into boomer category, but there's this sense of right and wrong that generation feels like younger generations have lost track of. So to see it in their entertainment is comforting.
And I think there's something very human when it comes to Westerns and the survival stories that come with that. if I get into sci-fi, it tends to be these sci-fi westerns because it strips away all of the shiny, it strips away all of the digital and whatever, and gets it down to the core of what it is to be human and figuring out what to do and how to work within this world where society is structureless.
Another reason why a lot of people lean into westerns is simply that horses are fun. They're seeing a lot of TV shows and movies and these kind of things where horses are a major character in the story. And even if they can't have one themselves, they want to see them in entertainment. They've been such a pivotal part of humanity for such a long time, especially the horse girls. Again, it becomes a large part of their identity. How they consume entertainment goes right along into that.
And with any historical fiction, we already have some kind of academic level understanding of what that era was like. We learned about the Western era during school. We learned about medieval. We learned about World War II. But if we're interested in that era, if we're interested in that time, then we want to understand on an emotional level. We want to connect more deeply with the people who would have experienced what their lives would have been like in that time. And that's why Westerns, any historical fiction, can really help people explore and have fun within this time that they may feel connected with in some way for some reason, but can't experience themselves. So they try to experience it through fiction. And you can help with that if you
write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.